Gas stations are supposed to be mundane pit stops, a brief pause in the journey. But what happens when those stops become unforgettable nightmares? Laura's morning shift at the petrol station always began with a comforting routine. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as she wiped the counters and arranged the newspapers neatly near the cash register. Outside, the world stirred to life, with early commuters stopping for fuel and the occasional cyclist grabbing a snack for their journey. These quiet hours gave Laura time to relax, read her book, and enjoy the stillness before the chaos of the day took over. Yet, this particular morning would leave a permanent mark on her psyche. The bell above the door jingled, drawing Laura's attention. She glanced up to see a man stepping inside. At first, she thought nothing of it. He was average height, with a worn sheepskin coat and disheveled curly hair that seemed to belong to another era. But as he moved, something about him felt unsettling. His gait was slow, deliberate, almost as if he was savoring each step. His gaunt face and hollow eyes radiated an intensity that immediately set Laura on edge. Trying not to stare, she returned her focus to the novel in her hands. Her heart raced, but she convinced herself it was just nerves. Customers came in all shapes and moods after all. As the man moved toward the refrigerated section, his slow, deliberate movements caught her peripheral vision. He grabbed a pint of milk but lingered there, his back to her, as if he was deciding on something more than just a purchase. When he finally approached the counter, Laura's unease deepened. He placed the milk on the counter but didn't speak right away. Instead, he locked eyes with her, his stare unwavering. His lips curved into a faint, unsettling smile. "You're a very pretty young lady," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Laura's stomach churned. She forced a polite smile, thanking him and ringing up the purchase as quickly as possible. "That'll be $1.50, she said, hoping to move things along. But the man made no move to retrieve his wallet. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, his unblinking gaze fixed on her face. "Pretty girls like you shouldn't work alone," he said, his tone laced with an edge Laura couldn't quite place. Was it a threat? A warning? She couldn't tell. Her fingers trembled as she handed him his change, willing him to leave. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed put, his eyes roaming over her like a predator sizing up its prey. "You shouldn't walk away from me," he added sharply when she took a step back from the counter. Laura's heart thudded loudly in her chest. She tried to keep her voice steady as she said, "Sir, I have other tasks to attend to." She gestured vaguely toward the storeroom. The man's smile disappeared. His expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "If you don't like being pretty, I can fix that for you," he hissed. Laura froze. The air seemed to grow heavier, suffocating. Her instincts screamed at her to act. Slowly, she reached for her phone, dialing the emergency number. The man's eyes flicked to her hand, and for a moment she thought he might try to stop her. But instead, he backed away, muttering something incomprehensible under his breath. Just as he reached the door, he turned back, his gaze as cold and menacing as ever. "I'll see you again," he said, before disappearing into the morning light. The moment he was gone, Laura locked the door and collapsed into her chair, trembling. She watched the CCTV monitor, ensuring he didn't linger outside. Minutes later, 2 police officers arrived, summoned by her call. Laura recounted the incident, her voice shaking as she described the man and his behavior. They reviewed the footage and nodded grimly. They knew him. The officers explained that the man was a known harasser with a history of targeting women working alone in remote areas. "You did the right thing calling us," one officer said. "We'll do our best to find him." And find him they did. Days later, the man was apprehended in another town, attempting a similar stunt. The news brought Laura some relief, but the fear lingered. Every time the bell above the door jingled, her body tensed. She found herself constantly glancing at the security monitors, scanning the faces of customers for anything out of the ordinary. In the weeks following the incident, Laura struggled to shake the psychological toll it had taken. Nightmares plagued her sleep, the man's sinister smile and chilling words replaying in her mind. She began taking self-defense classes, determined never to feel that vulnerable again. Her boss, recognizing the gravity of the situation, installed additional security measures at the station. Reinforced locks, more cameras, and even a panic button behind the counter. The incident also sparked a larger conversation in the community about worker safety. Other gas stations in the area followed suit, implementing similar protocols to protect their employees. Laura was invited to speak at a local safety workshop where she shared her story to raise awareness about the risks faced by those working alone in isolated environments. Despite these steps, Laura couldn't fully escape the shadow of that morning. Every creak of the door, every unfamiliar face sent her pulse racing. She became hyper-vigilant, her senses on high alert even in her daily life. The man had been caught, but the fear he instilled lingered like a dark cloud over her world. As months turned into years, Laura began to reclaim her sense of normalcy. She completed her university studies, earning a degree in sociology with a focus on workplace safety. Her experience at the petrol station inspired her to advocate for better protections for vulnerable workers. She collaborated with local organizations to develop training programs and pushed for legislation mandating safety protocols for businesses operating in remote areas. Through it all, Laura remained steadfast in her resolve not to let fear control her life. While the memory of that morning would always haunt her, it also served as a testament to her strength and resilience. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, turning her trauma into a force for change. If Laura's chilling experience sent shivers down your spine, show your support by liking this story and sharing it with friends who enjoy a good scare. John had always been a cautious driver, especially during late-night journeys. He preferred to keep his car fueled and snacks ready, minimizing the need to stop on deserted highways. But this particular night, his carefully planned trip didn't go as expected. The fuel gauge dipped below a quarter tank far sooner than he anticipated, forcing him to pull off at a small, dimly lit gas station in the middle of nowhere. The station sat like an island of light in an ocean of darkness. Its two pumps glowed faintly under flickering fluorescent lights, and the faint hum of the refrigeration units echoed in the still night air. A battered, empty car was parked near one of the pumps, its interior light casting an eerie glow. As John stepped out of his vehicle, a chill ran down his spine. The atmosphere was too quiet, no insects chirping, no wind rustling the sparse trees nearby. It was as if the entire area was holding its breath. John walked around his car to begin refueling, his eyes darting nervously toward the other vehicle. Its windows were fogged slightly from the night air, but there was no sign of anyone inside. The pump clicked on, and John tried to focus on the mundane task of filling his tank. The rhythmic clink of fuel coursing through the hose was oddly soothing, though it did little to quell his unease. After finishing at the pump, John decided to head inside the convenience store to grab a drink and pay for his fuel. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and the soft chime of the doorbell echoed through the eerily empty store. The aisles of snacks and shelves of dusty automotive supplies seemed untouched, frozen in time. John called out, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "Hello? Anyone here?" There was no response. He glanced toward the counter, noting the closed register and the absence of any attendant. A bead of sweat formed on his temple as he stepped further inside, his footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. The backroom door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond it. The thought crossed his mind that the attendant might have stepped out for a break or was occupied with something in the back. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then he noticed the faint metallic scent in the air. It wasn't overpowering, but it was distinct enough to make his stomach turn. John's unease deepened as he called out again, louder this time, but the store remained silent. Deciding not to linger, he turned to leave. But as he reached the door, a thought struck him. The dumpster outside. Maybe the attendant had gone out to take out the trash or deal with some other task. John stepped back into the cold night air, the sound of his boots crunching on the gravel unnervingly loud. The dumpster sat just behind the store, partially concealed by shadows. Its lid was slightly ajar, as if someone had recently used it. A wave of dread washed over him as he approached. The faint metallic smell from the store seemed stronger now. He hesitated for a moment, then lifted the lid. The stench hit him first, a sickly, overwhelming odor that made him gag. But it was what he saw inside that made his blood run cold. 2 bodies lay crumpled within, their limbs bent at unnatural angles. One was wearing a gas station uniform, the name tag barely visible in the dim light. The other appeared to be a customer, a woman in casual clothes. Their faces were contorted in expressions of terror, their lifeless eyes staring into nothingness. John stumbled back, his hand flying to his mouth as his stomach churned. Fumbling with his phone, he dialed 911, his fingers trembling so violently he nearly dropped the device. 911, what's your emergency? The calm voice of the dispatcher answered. I'm at a gas station, John stammered, his voice shaking. There are bodies in the dumpster, 2 of them. Sir, I need you to stay calm. Are you in immediate danger? I don't know, he exclaimed, glancing around the empty lot. There's no one here, but something's not right. Stay where you are and don't touch anything, the dispatcher instructed. Officers are on their way. John ended the call and backed toward his car, his eyes darting nervously toward the surrounding darkness. Every shadow seemed to move, every faint sound amplified by his racing heartbeat. The station's eerie silence pressed down on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It felt like an eternity before the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the lot. Officers swarmed the scene, securing the area and questioning John about what he had seen. He described the empty store, the abandoned car, and most importantly, the horrifying contents of the dumpster. The investigation that followed made local headlines, but details were scarce. The victims were identified: the gas station attendant, a young man in his 20s, and a middle-aged woman who had been passing through on her way home from visiting family. Neither had any known enemies, and their lives seemed ordinary. The autopsy reports revealed no obvious cause of death, no wounds, no signs of a struggle. The mystery deepened. Police reviewed the station's CCTV footage, hoping for clues. But the recordings only raised more questions. The footage showed the attendant working his shift as usual until about an hour before John's arrival. At one point, he glanced toward the store's entrance, his expression shifting from boredom to alarm. Then, Without warning, he left the counter and walked toward the back room. He never reappeared on camera. The woman's arrival was equally puzzling. She pulled into the lot, exited her car, and entered the store. Moments later, she too disappeared from view. There was no footage of her leaving, nor any indication of what had happened inside. Conspiracy theories began to circulate online. Some claimed the gas station was cursed, a site of supernatural phenomena. Others believed it was the work of a serial killer who had mastered the art of evasion. Amateur sleuths dissected every piece of information, but the case remained unsolved. For John, the experience was life-altering. The image of the bodies haunted his dreams, and the oppressive silence of the gas station echoed in his mind whenever he drove alone at night. He avoided long road trips and isolated locations, his once carefree demeanor replaced by constant vigilance. Share your thoughts on John's eerie discovery in the comments. What do you think happened? Let's hear your theories. Night shifts at North Star Mart were rarely eventful. Danny had taken the job because it offered the solitude he preferred. Time to think, time to work at his own pace, and time to just be alone. Nestled in the heart of rural Virginia, the station was surrounded by dense woods on one side and an empty stretch of highway on the other. Most nights, the only sounds were the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Judd, the station's owner, was a no-nonsense man. His rule was simple: if you see something strange, you call me. No exceptions. Danny had never had a reason to follow that rule until that night. Danny's shift had started like any other. He arrived at 10 p.m., greeted by the familiar sight of the empty parking lot and the soft glow of the pumps under the station's overhang. After restocking the shelves and tidying up the aisles, he settled into the back office. The security monitors displayed the usual views: the pumps, the lot, the store's entrance, and the aisles. Hours passed without incident, and Danny let himself relax. Around midnight, a movement on the monitor caught his eye. A lone figure stepped into the frame of the camera facing the highway. The man moved slowly, deliberately, his silhouette illuminated by the pale light of the street lamp. At first glance, he seemed like any other traveler: work boots, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. But as Danny watched, an unexplainable sense of unease crept over him. The man didn't approach the pumps or head toward the store. Instead, he stopped at the edge of the lot, standing motionless just outside the glow of the lights. Danny squinted at the screen, trying to make out the man's features, but his face was obscured by shadow. Minutes passed, and the man didn't move. Danny's fingers hovered over the phone, debating whether to call Judd. Finally, the man stepped forward, moving into the light. His face was pale, almost waxy, and his eyes, dark, glassy, and unblinking, seemed to stare directly at the camera. Danny's heart raced. It was as if the man knew he was being watched. Danny grabbed the phone and dialed Judd's number. "There's someone here," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "He's just standing outside." Judd's response was immediate. "What does he look like?" he demanded. Danny described the man, his clothes, his unsettling stare. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Judd said, "I'm coming. Don't go outside and don't open the door." Minutes later, Judd's truck roared into the lot. The security monitors showed him sprinting toward the store, barefoot and clutching a shotgun. Danny unlocked the door just long enough to let him inside. "Where is he?" Judd asked, his voice tight with urgency. Danny pointed to the monitor. The man was still standing near the entrance, his head tilted slightly as if listening, Judd's face paled as he glanced at the screen. He cursed under his breath and checked the shotgun, making sure it was loaded. But when Judd and Danny turned their eyes to the front window, the lot was empty. The man was gone. Judd spent the next hour searching the lot, the pumps, and even the woods beyond the station. He called out into the darkness, his voice echoing eerily in the still night. But the figure had vanished without a trace. Finally, Judd returned to the store, his face drawn and pale. "Go home," he told Danny. "I'll finish your shift." Danny tried to press him for answers, but Judd refused to explain. He simply locked the door behind Danny and stayed inside, the shotgun never leaving his grip. Over the following days, Danny couldn't shake the feeling that Judd knew more than he was letting on. He began asking around, talking to locals who frequented the station. What he learned only deepened the mystery. Years earlier, there had been rumors of a drifter who roamed the area. He was said to lurk near isolated businesses at night, always wearing the same baseball cap. Some believed he was harmless, just a lonely man with nowhere to go. Others claimed he was responsible for a string of disappearances that had plagued the region decades ago. Judd never spoke of the incident again. Whenever Danny brought it up, Judd would dismiss him with a wave of his hand and change the subject. Eventually, Danny quit his job, unable to shake the unease that had settled over him. But the memory of that night stayed with him, a constant reminder of the figure's unsettling presence. Years later, Danny still found himself thinking about the midnight lurker. Who was he? Why had Judd reacted with such fear? And why had the man vanished so suddenly? The questions lingered, unanswered, haunting Danny like a shadow that refused to fade. If this eerie tale of the midnight lurker kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe to Nightmare Narratives. Hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss a story that will send shivers down your spine. Share this story with friends who love a good scare, and let us know in the comments, what do you think Judd was hiding?